Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. This show is brought to you by Simplifying, which has been helping build trust in travel for over a decade. Through in-depth conversation with aviation leaders, sustainability in the air breaks through the current clutter and provides a clear roadmap for the future. It's about time we embarked on creating a net zero future for the industry, together. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simplifying.
Welcome to another episode of Sustainability in the Air. Today we are with Jeffrey Goh, the CEO of Star Alliance, which is the largest airline alliance in the world. Jeffrey has shepherded the alliance during COVID. He has set up a precedent when it comes to customer experience and digital touchpoints, and taken some bold initiatives towards sustainability as well. Today we'll be talking all about Jeffrey's tenure at Star Alliance, his vision around sustainability, what airlines can do. And I was very keen to do this interview because last year at the Apex Expo, Jeffrey was vocal that airlines need to step up their game when it comes to sustainability. It's been a few months since then, and I'm very keen to hear how he has been leading from an alliance perspective, which is the first alliance head we are interviewing on this podcast. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shashank, for having me. I think this is a great podcast here, Sustainability in the Air. I think it's unique. And I think provides a platform for us to share the views of why sustainability is important in aviation and how we can move together to make sure that aviation is sustainable.
Absolutely. Now, you already run the largest airline alliance in the world. Just when there were airlines to, perhaps run out of adding to the alliance, you added a train company, Deutsche Bahn. On the surface, it may seem counterintuitive to have a train company join an airline alliance, but it's quite a genius move in hindsight. Why don't you run us through the background on what got you adding a train company to an airline alliance?
Sure, absolutely. So to share some insights, and first and foremost, the business proposition, the business philosophy of Star Alliance is very much about connectivity and how a global network can provide connectivity that allows us to thread people and cultures together around the world, right? So one of the dimensions of strengthening our network proposition is obviously to grow the airline membership, but also to be sufficiently open-minded about the opportunities of how we can bring other modes of transportation into the network as we look for ways to strengthen that customer proposition with a global network. And I think particularly the last 2-3 years during the COVID-19 crisis, we were very much in the wild, wild west. And quite frankly, there is no business as usual anymore. And so looking for ways to disrupt, but also to strengthen our network proposition, the railways became an exciting and interesting perspective for us. But this intermodal model that we have built is not necessarily exclusive for the railway sector. It is sufficiently flexible for us to look at other potential modes of transportation, be that ferries. So if a passenger flies into Hong Kong, you have the ability to connect ferries across to, say, mainland China. Or indeed coaches and buses at airports where maybe long-distance trains or regional trains are not available. So coaches could also be part of that. So we've built a model that is sufficiently flexible for us to tap into different modes of transportation. But again, this is really to add choices for our customers in terms of destinations by expanding and strengthening the network. But I think two other points that's very important to say here beyond the network proposition is that we bring a lot of history and experience in terms of seamless customer experiences, whether it's baggage transfer or whether it's through check-in. allowing us to bring that experience to combine different modes of transportation together. So from an airline to the trains, or from the trains to an airline. So we want to make sure also that just because we bring in, coaches or train companies, customers are not left in a lurch where they got to search for their bags and recheck in again. So we hope that experience that we've had over 25 years stands us in good stead to try to create that better seamless experience. The second point to be made, or the third point indeed to be made, is obviously the sustainability proposition around this. Particularly more in Europe than in other markets for the time being. We've seen governments saying short-haul flying should be banned, domestic short-haul flying should be reduced. And if you try to think several steps ahead, the likely reality is that this short-haul flying is going to fade or disappear. And so how do we ensure connectivity for our customers? How do we ensure continued destination choices for our customers? And trains and coaches and other modes of transportation become very interesting in this respect. So this is really the background, the context, why we've looked into this. And as much as you are excited about the topic, we're also excited, but also wanting to make sure and keenly anxious to make sure that it works. Not only in terms of the seamless proposition, as I said, on through check-in, on baggage transfer, but also ambitiously on potential access to facilities like lounges, as well as loyalty program cooperation. So you earn miles and you redeem miles across different modes of transportation.
Right. I think that's a very detailed and insightful reply. Thank you so much. Now, one of the things is, let's look at Deutsche Bahn in Germany. This summer, Germany ran an experiment where you could buy a €9.50 ticket and ride trains all over. I've heard great things about how it led to a reduced carbon footprint for travel during the summer in Germany. And I've heard horror stories of, Berlin station completely jam-packed on a weekend with travelers because everyone's trying to take the train. How has the rollout been? Has it been smooth? Have there been hiccups? How has the initial rollout been with Deutsche Bahn?
Yeah, great question. So our intermodal connectivity here is mainly focused on Deutsche Bahn, which is more of the long distance, short, medium to long distance. The large part of that great deal by Deutsche Bahn was much more for regional traveling in a way. And so I think the impact has not been as great, in fairness. So the rollout has been as we anticipated. There were obviously a few frictions here and there, but that's to be expected. But these have all been blighted. I think you will agree that, particularly in the summer months, in terms of travel experiences for customers, whether by trains or by planes, it has just been not an experience that is what one would expect. I think a lot has been left wanting in terms of resource shortages, in terms of system failures. So I think if you will, the smooth integration experience of our intermodal model was blighted somewhat by the less pleasant experiences around not just the German airports, but also airports around Europe.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, I spent my summer in Europe as well, and I did not take a single flight. It was just trains, short distance, long distance. It was just trains, and generally it was smooth. I was, of course, traveling with kids, so that matters even more in terms of delays. You already touched upon this, that you're looking to expand this to other modes of transport or other countries. I recently read that Japan is experimenting with a 5,000 yen high-speed train ticket. Are there certain markets like Japan with high-speed rail connectivity or other countries that you're looking at to pilot this as well?
Yeah, so I think there are two dimensions for us to expand the experience of this model. One is to look at a new market, obviously, and Japan is an interesting proposition. So is Poland, for instance. But the other dimension I think that is worth mentioning is also the fact that we have Deutsche Bahn in our portfolio in Germany for our other member airlines, and not just Lufthansa, for the other member airlines to be more seamlessly connected to Deutsche Bahn. And so, you take an instance where, if for sustainability or any other reason, Lufthansa decides to stop flying between Frankfurt and Stuttgart, where they used to receive passengers from ANA in Japan or Singapore Airlines to Singapore, if that flight is not happening between Frankfurt and Stuttgart anymore, but the trains are, and then so these passengers will then connect to a train from Frankfurt to Stuttgart, right? So I think there are two dimensions here that we're talking about in terms of a new market, but also in terms of an incumbent market where we create more integration. In terms of new market, I think, yes, Japan is interesting, as I said, but Poland is also interesting. But as I alluded to at the beginning, the railways is not necessarily the panacea for intermodal connectivity. So if you look at, for example, in Japan, whether it's Narita or Haneda, there isn't really railway connectivity out of those two airports, right? But if you then look at, for example, Osaka, Kansai, where there are long-distance trains to the airport, then that becomes a fairly interesting proposition to look at. So one has to be quite selective and look at what the infrastructure is when we talk about intermodality in this regard. But yes, certainly I think Japan has a very interesting proposition to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a very counterintuitive way to start off our discussion today. Now, going back to sustainability, when I usually have airline CEOs on this podcast, it's so easy to discuss, all right, how many electric aircraft are you ordering? How much SAF do you need? But sitting here from an alliance CEO perspective, you can't really force airlines to buy electric aircraft. You can't dictate how many percentage SAF they use by when. What's your role as an alliance to encourage sustainable behavior, and how do you do it?
Yeah, so it's a challenge, but that challenge in itself is an opportunity. So we have a fairly clear framework, if you will, for the alliance in terms of supporting our members. First is that, as I said last year in different places, over the course of the past year, as I said in different places, we are not doing justice to ourselves as an industry in terms of educating the public, in terms of telling the public and the traveling consumers how well we have been doing or how much we have been doing as an industry in terms of sustainability for the industry. And so one of our pillars in our strategy, our framework, is to amplify the messages of our members. We have a broad reach through our social media platform, through our various communication channels, and we're using those to amplify many of the initiatives and activities and projects that our member airlines are doing. And so we have been very, very active in that area. The second is that what our member airlines are very clear about, and I think it's fairly fair to say that it's also for the industry to be fairly clear about, is the one thing that's going to move the needle today in terms of sustainability is the use or the uplift of sustainable aviation fuels. And so we have been working with our member airlines as well as third parties, as well as corporations, to see how we could find a way to create or to generate more momentum in terms of the usage and the uplift of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. But, and I know, and generally most other people also know, that there is a very limited supply of SAF. It's almost like gold dust today. And so everyone is chasing that limited supply, and it becomes very difficult. The other challenge about SAF is that from a regulatory perspective, in terms of being able to claim credits, different jurisdictions are applying different technical requirements in terms of recognizing the quality of SAF. All right, some SAF are made of cooking oil, some are made of waste, some are made of feedstock from other sources. Now, different jurisdictions recognize different feedstock in terms of their technical credits that can be had. And that becomes a problem, particularly for us as a global alliance where we have, member airlines based in the Americas, in the European Union, which probably has slightly stricter technical requirements of what feedstock is required in terms of getting recognized credits. So SAF is, or joint procurement, if you will, is one area that we have been supporting our members. The other thing I think is worth talking about from an innovation perspective is the new technologies in terms of carbon capture, investing in that technology, but also the next generation of carbon capture technology, which is then to convert it into liquid fuels. And if there is opportunity to jointly source, jointly procure, that's certainly something that we'll be very interested to work with our members to get there. So I said two of these. I mean, one is amplification, one in terms of joint procurement. The third is one of the best propositions, one of the great propositions about the Alliance is the ability to share information and knowledge and best practices. And so what we have been doing is to bring the sustainability experts of our member airlines to come to the table and share what they have been doing, whether it's about plastic reduction, whether it's about aircraft operations in terms of fuel burn, to something as diverse as part of the ESG conversation of the social dimension of sustainability, what our member airlines have been doing in terms of promoting, say, different gender, broader spread of diversity, equality, and inclusion. So that has been very, very valuable in terms of educating each other. Because let's be honest and recognize that different members at different parts of the world are moving in a different speed in terms of sustainability aspirations compared to other members in other parts of the world. And so there's a lot that is there still to be shared between airlines and certainly between our members. So those are really the three focus areas. Although we don't fly aeroplanes, so we are not at the forefront of being looked at in terms of sustainability and emissions. But there is a support structure that we have created for our members.
That's really good to know, and I thank you once again for being so structured in your replies. Now, is this the Sustainability Summit Star Alliance hosted? Is that what you're talking about, the knowledge sharing platform?
Over and above that, the Sustainability Summit that we had earlier in the year was much more broad-based. Yes, it is also information and practice sharing, but we involved third parties. We brought in third parties from Airbus to the reporting agencies, as well as some big corporations. And some of the topics that were talked about, for example, with Airbus, was the future of hydrogen aircraft. What is the outlook for that? The reporting agencies were able to share with us the constraints, for example, on feedstock and how that is affecting the price of SAF. We have big corporations that came to the summit that talked about what their expectations are of airlines going forward for corporate travel, how they're adjusting their corporate travel in terms of reducing carbon footprint, but also their intention of how they can contribute to the extra cost and premium of carrying SAF, for example. So it was very illuminating in that regard, but we also brought in the other dimensions that we very often forget on the ESG conversation, on the sustainability conversation, which is a social dimension. And so we had a good introduction by one of the member airlines in this case of how they have been driving forward the diversity, equality, and inclusion concept within their sustainability program. But we also brought in another external stakeholder on how do you actually measure your success in terms of your sustainability aspirations, particularly emissions. If I stop using 1,000 tons of plastic, how much does that contribute to the reduction of emissions, for instance? If I carry so much SAF, how much is that reducing in terms of emissions? So I think there is still a very nascent industry of measuring the emissions reduction still. So we wanted our member airlines to be attuned to how that part of the this particular campaign on sustainability is going forward. But that's a summit. But beyond the summit, within our sustainability committee audience, we share also strategies, practices, activities that are happening. So each time we come together on a quarterly basis, 2 or 3 of the member airlines will be talking about what they have been doing by themselves.
Very nice. So you've got like an annual summit with airline CEOs and experts, and then a quarterly sustainability committee sharings that are happening between the airline groups. Exactly.
And I think, you and I will accept here that there's still so much to learn in terms of sustainability, in terms of what can be done in reducing emissions, for instance. I don't think we're there yet as an industry. I don't think we're there yet in terms of our knowledge. So there's still some way to go, excitingly, on that front.
No, absolutely. I think knowledge sharing is definitely a good first step. Amplifying the message, like you said, is also another good step. But I come back to the point around implementation. At best, you can share the knowledge, but then it's up to the airlines to implement some changes. You can bring the people to the table. It's like you can bring the horse to the water, you can't make the horse drink the water, right?
Yes.
Do you feel as an alliance then, you're handicapped a little in terms of actually effecting change when it comes to sustainability practices?
Yeah, I think there's a an extent of truth in that, Shashank. I think we will not hide that because we're not. First of all, we don't fly aeroplanes ourselves, and our member airlines are at different stages in terms of sustainability ambitions. Even today, where regulatory dimensions are concerned, China, for example, is not necessarily aligned with the IATA industry of 2050 net zero emissions target. India, as you well know yourself, I think has a target of 2070, if I'm not mistaken, for net zero emissions. And so it is kind of a challenge, if you will, to then say, we should all do this. Of course, each of our member airlines have that individual aspirations. And so to that extent that we can get alignment, we try to do so and try to push initiatives along. But setting standards becomes quite challenging. IATA itself has a challenge to set standards in this regard, other than an ambition of net zero 2050. How you actually get there has been very challenging. And so I think it's very difficult to set standards in this regard, because it might be easier, for instance, for the Western world to implement a technology of carbon capture, for instance. Whereas perhaps in other parts of the world where, the carbon capture technology may still be, some way off before it arrives there, and so on. And then we are also at the mercy of the markets in terms of where SAF is available, whether it's in the West Coast US or whether it's out of Singapore, out of Rotterdam. That has an impact at the end of the day of how much SAF you can uplift as well. So we can't really enforce that in a way to say you must uplift 1% of that. The regulators are trying to do that job, and there are challenges even for the regulators to do that. So we've stayed away from that and tried to support the member carriers in terms of, as I said, those three parameters: amplify, educate the public, what we've been doing. To the extent that we can jointly procure, we try to do that, and then try to make sure that we all understand as much as possible amongst ourselves.
Right. I think that's a fair point, and I appreciate you acknowledging that this is indeed a constraint you have to deal with as an alliance. While researching for this interview, I'll observe that SkyTeam, for example, has run the Sustainable Flight Challenge, where they pushed different airlines to try different things. One World has ordered SAF jointly and procured SAF jointly, hopefully at a better price. Are these things you're looking to do as well? You mentioned joint procurement. Are there certain things you're already working on procuring with airlines? Yes,
we have been, and we are still in the middle of that. A couple of locations that we are, getting quite close to some sort of an agreement. But as I said earlier, the challenge is chasing that gold dust. So where you can do it in terms of location depends on supply and availability and logistics. So that becomes a challenge where we can do that.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that.
I think Shashank, maybe if I can take the opportunity to expand that a little bit more, is that there is no shortage of willingness to bring more volume to the market. But this whole sustainability or emissions conversation is not just an airline conversation. I think I've said several times before on different platforms that it is an ecosystem of players if we want to make sure that aviation is sustainable going forward. It is not, the airlines are not the only ones who should be in the focus. Under the spotlight, it should also be the airports. It should also be the aircraft manufacturers, the engine manufacturers, the fuel producers and suppliers, but importantly also the governments and the authorities. Where are the incentives? Where are the challenges for us to produce more SAF? So it's one thing for a government or the authority to say airlines need to have 5% SAF blended into the jet fuel by 2030 or 2040 or whatever the target is. But if there's insufficient SAF to uplift, then we are going on a vicious circle, and there is yet to be found a sweet spot of incentive structure for the Nestes of the world, for the Shells of the world, and the producers of fuel of the world to increase production of SAF. And so, I think it's somewhat distorted to just see the responsibility of reducing emissions on the airlines. It's a game where all of us are part of, and the airlines are. And I'm not defending it because just we are in the airline industry, but I think if we're really going to make a significant constructive move forward in procuring a sustainable aviation industry, then there are many who should be part of this game and part of this conversation.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. The ecosystem matters so much. It's not just about where the SAF is, how it's getting there. It's also government regulations. I think the recent bill passed in the US with the incentives for SAF will definitely help the industry way more, I feel, than the European disincentives. It's carrot and stick. Europe uses stick. US is using carrots here. Indeed. To try to increase production here.
Indeed.
And I think that should definitely help. I recently watched the Boom CEO talk about how there'll be so much SAF in 10 years that supersonic jets will be able to take off with 100% SAF, and they're very confident of that. I wish supersonic comes back, but they were very, very confident. Even if they are 50% right, I think there'll be a lot more SAF than there is today with lower prices. So you're absolutely right. It's the ecosystem that matters. Now, from ecosystem, let's move on to the eco chamber. I go back to my initial point, which you had made at the AFEX conference last year, where you said, airlines are playing defense when it comes to sustainability and the initiatives. It's something you alluded to earlier as well, that you help to amplify the messages of your member airlines. What do you feel that is the biggest challenge airlines face in sustainability?
Well, I think there are many challenges. I mean, we talked about the availability of SAF. Airlines inherently want to reduce emissions. I mean, there's no airline who wants to pollute unnecessarily. And therefore, if SAF, for example, is one way to move the needle, they would uplift the SAF. But of course, as I said, we know that cost, is very costly. Volume is very little. And so that's one of the challenges. But I think getting the public and the consumers to be more aware of what the industry has been doing, I think it's a key step to have. First and foremost, at least from an international aviation perspective, we know that generally speaking, the emissions from international aviation is about 2 to 3% of global emissions. So in terms of putting it in perspective, it pales into insignificance when you compare to other industries, right? I mean, 2 to 3%, right, at the end of the day. But that's not belittling the problem. And of course, everyone has a part to play. But I think there is so much that the industry is doing that the average public needs to be aware of or to be informed. The investments that airlines and the industry are making into new aircraft, into lighter aircraft, into less fuel burn aircraft, into more efficient engines, those are not, your $10, $20 investments. Those are multi-million and billion investments. And I think that part of the message needs to come across. And then not only about the investments, but therefore what is the impact in terms of reducing emissions for every new generation aircraft that is in the air, how much emissions we're taking away. So that's one part. The investments that airlines are making into new technologies on capturing carbon, converting them into liquid fuels, that's another part that I think that can be foretold. The general idea of planting trees, I think everybody knows that, but we know that we cannot plant enough trees to reduce emissions anyway around the world. But there are also small things like, educating the public that SAF, whilst it's very important, volume is little, right? The amount of plastics that airlines and the industry are trying to reduce, for example, carrying less weight on board aircraft. I mean, you don't get in-flight menus anymore. You don't get in-flight magazines anymore. You don't get in-flight newspapers anymore. And that's all part and parcel of trying to reduce weight and therefore less fuel burn. And the products that are used now more and more on board, recyclable cups or, bamboo knife and fork and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are being done, which I think, we need to get out there and inform the public better of what the industry has been doing on top of that 2 to 3% emissions that we've just been talking about. And also, let's not forget what the industry has been doing. Yes, of course, I think there is still some way to go in terms of the social part of the sustainability conversations, right? In terms of creating better gender equality, better diversity, better inclusiveness. The industry has also taken significant steps in this regard. The IATA 25 by 25, but also if you look at one of our member airlines, Air Canada, whom you know very well, has been at the forefront of the social part of ESG. They've received accolades after accolades for that. And that story also, I think, needs to be told, and not just, sustainability from the point of view of the environmental perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point I see you raising, which is don't just look at it with one focus on sustainability only. There's more to ESG and being a socially responsible organization
Indeed.
than only sustainability. And even in sustainability, lots of people just look at CO2 emissions. But there's more than just the CO2. There are lots of other factors involved, like you said, bamboo cutlery or bogs to water, things like that. You're absolutely right. I flew just last week back from London to Canada. I went to the Singapore Airlines lounge in Terminal 2, which is one of my favorite. And for the first time, I was surprised when I couldn't pick up a copy of the Straits Times there and get my local fix without actually coming into Singapore. And they said, oh, you know what, click here to scan a barcode and you will get to read it on the Singapore Airlines app. And that is indeed, in practice, what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that's the future. I mean, it's clever, it's innovation and digitalized, but this is one small step, I think, in addressing the sustainability and the emissions issues. And I think that part of it, if you were not flying, if you did not go to the Singapore Airlines lounge, you probably would not have recognized that there was no New Straits Times in the lounge, right? So that's the message that we somehow need to propagate a lot more and be less of a defensive state in terms of sustainability conversations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because a lot more people know and listen to Greta than know or listen to the airline CEO.
Yes.
Right? They might not even know the name of their local airline CEO for that matter.
Indeed. Yes.
It is indeed important. Which airlines, in your opinion, are doing a good job when it comes to both sustainability and communicating about their efforts? And you need not restrict this to Star Alliance members. You can go beyond if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of say more about Star Alliance because I know them better. But I think it's probably a truism to say many airlines are really at the forefront of the sustainability conversations. You look at Air Canada, as I mentioned. New Zealand has always been at the forefront of that, Air New Zealand. United Airlines have been investing in carbon capture technologies, in sustainable aviation fuels. ANA is another of our member airlines, really at the forefront of sustainable aviation fuels. Different products on board that are recyclable, for example, reusable. So I think there are many airlines within the alliance and outside the alliance that are very progressive in terms of the sustainability aspirations. There are others that are slightly behind for multiple reasons, because they are looking for their own survival first, getting out of bankruptcy and Chapter 11, for instance, and all the rest of that. And there are some where, perhaps the markets are less expectant in terms of sustainability ambitions. And so perhaps the consumer pressure is not as immediately felt as, in some other markets. But that's just a question of time, and it will happen. So there are different really progress and stages and different sophistication between our members as well and within the industry too. But yeah, there are some that are really at the forefront and they are to be respected, to be learned from indeed.
Right, absolutely. I was recently speaking to two Star Alliance members I shall not name. One Actually, they are both in Asia. And one of them said, Shashank, we are not doing too many sustainability initiatives because our local regulator doesn't require us to. And the other one said, Shashank, we will only do something that is industry standard. We will not take our own individual steps because you know what happens when you get blamed for greenwashing if you really are proactive. So I felt people were, executives were concerned or scared to act on their own, and that's why I feel sort of a united approach that you bring to the table from an alliance perspective can help airlines come out of their shell, learn best practices, and then go forward with some of these initiatives as well.
Yeah, and I think it bears reiterating that I think there's so much, not just about educating the public and the consumers, even educating within the industry. There is still some way to go for that. You touch upon the very anxious topic of greenwashing. That one of the airlines in the world is in court proceedings for allegedly greenwashing. And this is the concern, no doubt, amongst many airline CEOs, that, if they proclaim to have achieved this and that emissions or those, targets, you're open to challenge if you're not careful. And I think this is where that information exchange, best practice exchange is very, very valuable amongst ourselves in the industry and within the alliance.
Yeah, and I think behind closed doors, executives can share openly their fears as well as how another airline might have overcome the same challenge in their own country or in their own markets.
Right.
Are you hopeful about the future of sustainable aviation or sustainability in aviation, or do you feel it's a very hard road ahead?
I think there are challenges in the immediate to short term. But there is no better example than the past 2 years to really repeat the statement that the aviation industry is a very resilient and adaptable industry. Right? So regulators can put targets, can put decrees. The industry will respond, will make sure that it is resilient and adaptable to those requirements. So I expect the industry to be sustainable, to also be, producing sustainable travel options for the consumers. But the anchor of collective success is really when the players within the ecosystem who all have a stake in this game come together and really beat the pathway forward. It cannot just be the responsibility of one part of this ecosystem. We're not going to be collectively successful in the way that we want to achieve our ambitions in terms of particularly environmental sustainability.
Right. I think you have an important point there about the industry moving together as a whole. Now, you've, of course, been at the helm of Star Alliance for some time. And, you've led the alliance, like I said, initially focused on digital and customer experience when that was needed, then helped navigate now COVID-19. What's your legacy at Star Alliance, Jeffrey?
That's a great question, but I think that's something that is for the my shareholders and the consumers to judge. But I like to think that the one thing that we set in motion, and for different parts of the industry to follow along, is digital transformation, digitalization, bringing more conveniences to the customers. We're in the 21st century, but many of the customer experiences are not in the 21st century. They are before the pre-21st century experiences. And I think we owe it to the customers to do that. And, I think we at Star Alliance are proud that, we have been aggressive in digitalization, in automation. Just a very simple example of one of the things that the alliances stand for is the loyalty proposition and the loyalty conveniences, right? In Star Alliance, 7 years ago, you were sitting on 1,000,000 miles and you want to redeem your miles. You got to call a call center to redeem the miles on another airline that is not your frequent flyer program. You got to call a call center and you hang on for 11 minutes. And then an agent picks up the phone and you tell the agent, I want to fly from Tokyo to Osaka on the 21st of November. And the agent says, no availability. I'm sorry, Shashank. And you say, well, okay. When do you have availability? And then the agent tells you, well, you have it on the 24th of November, but not 21st. But then you're going to have to go back and check with your domestic partner and your family to say, well, okay, we're going to have to change to the 24th. So you hang up and you go home, you check with your domestic committee, you call back again an hour later, and you wait for another 12 minutes. Someone tells you, yes, on the 24th, I forgot to tell you that there are only 2 seats available. Well, you're looking for 4 seats, right? Today you have the elegant solution of having that control at your fingertips, where you just log on to the website or the channel of communication of choice, which is your frequent flyer program, and you just type in your origin and your destination. You put in the dates, and you see whether there's availability or when the next availability is, and you play with it like you would play to buy a normal ticket. And you do this from the back of a bus. You do this in your office. You do this in your bed. You do it in the comfort of your sofa. You have the control of your experience. And I think this is the one thing that I think we're proud to have been able to drive more automation and digitalization for the convenience of the customers.
I think you're absolutely right. I can myself, I have my own experiences having switched from Singapore as my hub to Africa as a hub to Canada as a hub, and having dealt with multiple airlines. You're absolutely right. It's become much easier to earn and burn miles, definitely. And going forward, I feel that if sustainability becomes part of the conversation as an alliance's gold benefits or as an alliance's key value prop, then I think it becomes very interesting, especially with some of the topics we touched upon earlier, like if it's intermodal and I can take a Deutsche Bahn after landing in Frankfurt to Stuttgart or to Düsseldorf rather than flying. Hey, it's actually, at least to Düsseldorf or Cologne, it's a better experience already because I don't have to check in earlier, wait for my flight, and then take like a 45-minute flight to get over. I can just hop on the train and carry on. And I like the fact that you're thinking laterally around this, where intermodal buses, maybe electric buses in the future, not just trains. I think there's definitely hope. I also, find it hopeful and encouraging that you not only are you having knowledge sharing sessions amongst your airline members, but also on the Star Alliance website, you can actually sort. I think there's a section where you can sort all the airlines' CO2 reduction methods, all the airlines' in-flight sustainability initiatives. And I think that's quite powerful in terms of communicating to the customers as well as other stakeholders what the airlines are doing, because it's usually not found in the same place.
Right. And we take pride in the fact that we have, a very large number of unique visitors to our channels, our website, for example. And hence, it's a very good place for us to amplify the messages, the initiatives of our member airlines in one place, as you say.
Exactly. I think that's definitely encouraging, and I really appreciate your frank opinions on both what the airline industry is getting right, as well as where there is work to be done. I found this discussion very insightful. Now, for the final part of this interview, Jeffrey, it's called the rapid fire round. You have not seen the questions, and how it's going to work is I'm going to ask you a question, and you will reply with the first thing that comes to your mind without, thinking about it for 5 minutes. So that's the underlying idea with this. We'll start it very, very easy. Okay, what's your favorite book to read?
The Leadership Engine.
The Leadership Engine. Who is it by?
Noel Tichy. Tichy.
Okay, I'm going to pick that up next time when I'm out and about. We'll still keep it easy. What's your favorite movie?
Too many.
Oh, okay, what's the last movie you watched on your flight to Singapore?
Oh, gosh, I haven't watched movies for a while. Let me see. I'm going to try to get as much food as possible. Nothing memorable, I have to say.
Oh no, Jeffrey, you got to start.
The Italian Job.
The Italian Job. Okay, that's a good one.
Yes.
All right, I like that. Okay, favorite airline.
I got to take counsel on this one, Shashank.
You were the legal counsel at Star Alliance, so I'm sure we are in good hands.
Star Alliance Airlines.
All right, I'll give you that one to escape from. Your favorite city?
Oh, I love many cities for different reasons. Auckland is one of them. Beijing is another. London is another for a different reason. Montreal is another for a different reason. San Francisco, love it to bits.
Okay. Let me clarify. Your favorite city to go for a holiday in or a vacation in?
My favorite city to go for a holiday or a vacation, I put it down perhaps to San Francisco.
Okay. Well, now you have lots of non-stop
Yeah.
flights, not just from Frankfurt, but from Singapore as well. So that should help.
Indeed.
Okay. What is something that you want to learn?
There are so many things that you never finish learning. From a professional perspective, the psychology of leadership. There are just so many leadership journeys, and the psychology of leadership is, I think, from a professional perspective, it is something that's fascinating. From a private perspective, if I may expand your question, is enology, wines. How do you grow wines? Is one of my
Nice.
favorite topics. Yes.
Wow, that's very interesting. I'm not sure if Singapore has a wine industry, but that can be your
No, it doesn't.
post-retirement.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yes.
Glad to know. I have a few friends who are really into that, and maybe I'll connect you
Thank you.
for future.
Thank you.
on
Yes,
that.
I was asked
So-
I was asked on the platform before on a conference panel. Not just to me but to all the panelists. What's the next job after what we were doing? And my response was to sell wines.
Wow, fantastic. I like that. Okay, what do you love to do in your free time?
Sports, run. Yep.
You're a runner?
Yeah, because I 7 years ago, I could hardly walk. On a personal note, there was a chronic inflammation on one of my knees. And to be able to now run even a half marathon, I am just very, very delighted and pleased. And so I continue to do that and appreciate my fermented grape juice.
That's fantastic. Hence, fermented grape juice. That makes complete sense now. And, well, that's a story of resilience, just like the airline industry in itself, right?
Indeed.
And finally, what's the best advice you've ever received?
There is always a different perspective. There's always a different perspective. And, Shashank, I will share as a leader to my team, what I call the teachable point of view, the TPOV, that I often share with my people as a leadership conversation, is many, many years ago. We're talking about decades. A hot-headed youngster, hot off with a brand new driving license, and on a trail of cars, and going home from the city to home. And one smart punk was trying to overtake me. I was in the line of cars, and he was overtaking around a corner on a double white line. And I refused to let him in. Because, he wasn't supposed to do that. He was overtaking around a corner, and he was taking around a double white lines. But later on, I asked myself, what happens if there had been an oncoming traffic that he could not have avoided, and some mishap happened? Would I be able to live with myself? I could hold a view to say, well, he was at wrong. He went across double white. He was going around a bend, overtaking. He was at wrong. But then I asked myself, there could be a different perspective to this. He could have been rushing home to rescue the mother that fell down the stairs into the drain, or his baby son that fell down the stairs and knocked his head unconscious on the cement floor. There could have been that perspective, why he or she was in a rush. And so that's one lesson I've learned for myself, and I continue to preach that message, that often there is, perhaps very likely 99.9% a different perspective to matters and to things.
Yeah, no, that's very humbling, and I appreciate you opening up and sharing. In fact, if anyone listening to this podcast traveled during the summer, especially in and out of Europe, they'd be familiar with security lines that often stretched, outside the airport. And when I was flying out of Heathrow just last week, there was a man who came rushing, sweating, saying, I need to make this flight. I really need to make this flight. Can I please skip? And I said, sure, go ahead. And he asked every single person, and everyone said yes. There was not a single person. And then I think, and I hope, fingers crossed, he made his flight. But he was rushing. Even one person could have said, no, don't jump the queue. This is the rule. The security lady didn't say anything and said, ask the passengers in the queue. And that was a long way to the security checkpoint. But, when we are traveling, there are so many touch points, from the cabin crew who might be a bit tired after a turnaround, or the check-in staff who may be having a shift from 5 a.m. and had to get to the airport at 4:30 a.m. for that and checking you in. I think just having a bit of empathy and this different perspective is so important. Such an important advice. Thank you.
Quite so. My pleasure.
Indeed, Jeffrey, it was a pleasure speaking with you. And as always, I appreciate you opening up and sharing some insights and a very different perspective, not just into sustainability, but also running Star Alliance and leadership. I'm sure the listeners will enjoy this episode as much as I have enjoyed the conversation with you. Thank you.
I hope so. And thank you very much for the opportunity, Shashank. I really appreciate this. And I think, as I said at the beginning of our chat here, this is a very important platform for us to continue with the messaging and the education of sustainability.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. We hope you liked it and will share it with your network. Please also leave us a review. Awareness is the key to a green future. Your support will help our insights on sustainable aviation reach a wider audience. In addition, for every single listen of this podcast, we will plant a tree. And for every single review, we will plant 50 trees. You can also write to us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.